In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear brake caliper on this Ford F-150. You'll have one of these on each side of your vehicle and the process is the same. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is put our vehicle in parking brake service mode. To do that, we'll be inside the passenger compartment. You're going to want to put the key in the on position with the vehicle not running. We're going to press down and hold on the accelerator pedal all the way to the floor, and your parking brake switch. We'll go ahead and push that in as well. Continuing on from there, we're going to set the ignition to off and then right back to ignition on within 5 seconds. Paying attention to the dash, we should find that it says that it's in service mode. Key on. I'm pressing down the accelerator and pressing on my parking brake switch. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off the power and then right back on again. All right, it looks like we're in the parking brake service mode and I could hear both of those caliper motors functioning properly. Go ahead and turn off key power. Safely raise and support the rear of your vehicle. We're going to remove the rear wheel by removing all 6 of our 21mm lug nuts. Let's pay attention to the caliper directly at that bleeder screw. We need to make sure this opens. Most times your bleeder screw will have a rubber cover on it. Just go ahead and pull that up and off of there. Just going to break it free. Set that aside, we will be reusing it. We'll be using an 11mm for our bleeder screw. Let's get some penetrant on there. You want to make sure you can see a steady trickle of fluid coming out of the bleeder screw. That confirms that the bleeder screw is in good usable order. We'll go ahead and close this off. Once you have the bleeder screw broken free and you're sure there is fluid making its way out, we're going to have to open this one more time. When doing so, you also want to make your way up to the passenger compartment with a pry bar or a rod of some sort, and we need to press that brake pedal all the way down to the floor and hold it there while we continue on throughout the entire replacement process. Now we have our collection receptacle under here. Now, while having our collection receptacle under this area, let's start removing the flex hose from the caliper by loosening our 12mm headed banjo bolt. Keep in mind, fluid will come out of this area commonly. Now you should be able to remove the flex hose from the caliper. Have a quick look at the caliper now. At the mounting point where your flex hose should be, there may still be an original gasket here. Now we can start removing our emergency brake motor. That's this plastic area across here. It's held in place with 2 T27 Torx screws holding it in there. It's common for these to be stuck in place. If you find that your tool is stripping, you can try using some locking pliers to break it free. There we go. Now you can see this wire moving around. It's typically attached to the motor right up about here. This one looks like it's already dislodged. Typically you can leave that right on the motor. You do not need to dislodge it. With both of those out of there, the next thing we're going to do is carefully rock the motor back and forth and gently pry it out and away. We've got some movement here. Once you have the motor off of there, you need to give this area a quick inspection and a quick wipe, confirming it's still in good usable condition. This looks good. Let's hang it aside, putting no pressure on our wiring harness. Now that we have the motor off of there, let's continue on to removing our two 13mm caliper slider mounting bolts. Start with the top one here. Go ahead and loosen it up, a quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads. Now we can remove this portion of the caliper. We'll set that aside. Make sure you drain this out into your collection receptacle. It's time to remove the brake pads from the area. Once you do remove the brake pads, you want to give them a quick inspection. If it looks like they're worn at an angle or damaged in any way, you definitely want to do a brake job. These look fine. We'll set them aside. Now let's start removing our caliper bracket. You have two 21mm headed mounting bolts. Let's start with the top one. Remove it, a quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads. As for these two mounting bolts, you will be reusing them. If it looks like they're rotted or damaged, you need to replace them with brand new ones. And there it is, friend. Go ahead and set that aside for recycling. Now let's have a look at our new caliper. Along the back side, we're going to remove our two 13mm headed mounting bolts holding the caliper to the bracket. As far as the caliper itself, it should come with a brand new banjo bolt and two brand new gaskets. Those are important to take note of. You never reuse your original gaskets. We'll set this aside for now and focus on the bracket itself. Moving along, we're going to remove each one of our two caliper slider pins and their corresponding boots. For this, I'm just going to use a small pocket screwdriver as a small prying device, and I'll gently start pulling that boot up and away from our caliper bracket. After that, you should be able to remove your caliper slider pin. We'll continue on with some high temperature caliper lubricant, lubricating that entire pin. Once you have that lubricated, we're going to reinstall that into its corresponding port. We'll slide it down. Before we continue pushing that all the way in, we'll use some high temperature lubricant right along this area here. Go ahead and press that all the way on there as far as possible. We're going to give this a twist, working in that lubricant. Repeat the process on the other side. Now let's go ahead and give this a spin. We're going to pay attention to these two areas. There's one on each side of the bracket. We need to add some high temperature lubricant along where the caliper bracket tins would be. A thin amount will do. This will help prevent rust in this area. Now with your caliper, it came with some brand new tins. We're going to go ahead and get these in position, press them on there as far as possible, a light tug to make sure they're properly secured in place. Repeat the process on the other side of the caliper bracket. All right, that's good for the bracket. Let's continue on to the other portion of the caliper. This is the muscle portion here. It has a piston and it has two ears. We're going to apply lubricant to each of these areas. This helps with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now we can get over to the vehicle. We'll start with the caliper bracket. Once you have that in place, continue on with your two 21mm headed mounting bolts. I've cleaned the threads and applied some blue thread locker. Start in each one of those mounting bolts. Snug them up. The torque for these is 181 foot-pounds. Continuing on, it's time to install the brake pads. As for the brake pads, you want to make sure you install them in the same orientation as where you had removed them. The inboard pad needs to go back on the inboard side. When you're installing the pads, you want to make sure you do not have to hammer them into position. That could typically mean that there's an issue in some way. You want to take care of that. These are fine. Let's move along. Now we can get the rest of the caliper in place. We're sliding this in and over our brake pads onto the caliper sliders, and we'll continue on with the caliper slider mounting bolts. For those bolts, go ahead and start them in, snug them up. The torque for this is 26 foot-pounds. Now let's have a look along the back side of the caliper. This is where that parking brake motor is going to sit. You want to make sure you use some lubricant directly in the center port here and along this black O-ring, making its way all the way around. This is the sealing ring. We want to help that motor slide into place easily. Now we can get our motor in place. We're just going to attempt to bring this in. It should press all the way in until it's completely flush. Now you can pivot it as necessary. We'll continue on with our brand new mounting bolts. Go ahead and start those in and we'll snug them up. Once those are snug, torque them to 71 inch-pounds. We'll just make sure our wire is properly secured in place. I'm going to be using a wire tie. Now let's have a quick look at our flex hose. We want to pay attention to both of the mounting points, confirming that there is no pre-existing gasket still in place. I'll just use a clean rag. We'll give this a quick wipe. Now looking closely at this, I can see the other ring. There it is. Go ahead and set that aside. Continuing on, we'll just go ahead and clean this up a little bit and we can prepare to install this onto the caliper. When we bring the flex hose into place, we're going to be paying attention to our brand new banjo bolt. Make sure you have one of your brand new gaskets directly on the flange of the banjo bolt. We'll continue on with bringing the banjo bolt through the flex hose. Now we'll be using our next brand new gasket. Slide that right over that. We can get this in place. Once you have that started in, snug it up. The torque for this is 26 foot-pounds. Clean up your mess in this area. Now we're moving up to the bleeder screw. You can remove your protective cover from this area. Quick inspection, set that aside. You will be using this. Make your way back into the passenger compartment and remove your brake pedal depressor. After that, we'll make our way back out here to our bleeder screw. We'll have our collection receptacle under here. Open this with an 11 millimeter and wait for a steady trickle of fluid coming out, essentially a gravity bleed. At this point, we have a steady trickle of fluid coming out of here with no air bubbles. Close the bleeder screw. Let's clean our mess. Make your way up into the passenger compartment. Pump up the brake pedal. If it doesn't feel firm, you have to continue on with a manual brake bleed. Otherwise, go ahead and clean up your mess and reinstall your bleeder screw cover. One last quick inspection in this area, we'll reinstall our wheel. Once you have all the lug nuts started on and bottomed out, we'll have the wheel back on the ground. Torque each one of your lug nuts to 150 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Now it's time to deactivate the service mode for our parking brake. We're back inside the passenger compartment. We need to put the key in the on position. Once we've done that, we're going to press down on the accelerator pedal and pull up on the parking brake switch. Turn off the key power and then turn it back on within 5 seconds. Power on, gas pedal, switch, I'm holding it. Key off, key on. We'll just keep holding that for a second here until we can hear those motors stop functioning along the back. Now we can release that and turn off key power. Okay friend, at this point you just want to make sure you pump up your brake pedal, and we're going to test the functionality of the parking brake by starting up the vehicle, put it in drive, actuate your parking brake, and ensure the vehicle does not move. Aside from that, thanks for watching. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Before we start removing anything up inside the engine compartment, you need to remove each one of your wheels and make your way to the caliper. On each caliper, you're going to find a bleeder screw. It needs to be opened. After you open it, go ahead and close it off. If it does not open or breaks, that's something that you need to take care of before you continue your process. Now that we're sure that all the bleeder screws open up on our brakes, we're underneath the hood at that master cylinder. We need to remove as much fluid from inside the master cylinder as possible and replace it with brand new .3 brake fluid up to the maximum so we can start our brake bleed. Now I have a fluid extractor here. I can remove the fluid. Let's get this up to that maximum line. Reinstall your brake fluid cap. Now it's time to bleed the brakes. We're starting at the right rear, passenger side rear. Once we're done at the right rear, we're going to go over and do the exact same thing over on the driver's side rear, and then we're going to make our way to the master cylinder to top it off. To bleed the brakes, it's going to be easiest with a second person. The second person will be up inside the vehicle and they're going to pump up the brake pedal for us. They'll pump it approximately 3 to 5 times until it starts to feel firm. Hold it, let me know, and I'm going to open up our bleeder screw. When we open this up, we're paying attention to fluid coming out and making sure we do not see any air bubbles. We'll have to repeat this process until you see only fluid and no air. We have our collection receptacle under here, hand and eye protection. Go ahead and pump up the brake pedal, please. Go ahead and pump. You can release the brake pedal. At this point, I have no air coming out of the system for several times bleeding here. We'll go over to the driver's side, repeat this same process after we've cleaned our mess and reinstalled our bleeder screw cover. Now we'll make our way back up to the master cylinder here on the driver's side. We're going to have to top it off. As you can tell, the fluid is a little low. We want to bring it up to the maximum. Now I'm over at the passenger side front after finishing bleeding the driver's side rear and stopping at the master cylinder to top it off. Let's go ahead and repeat our process here. Once we're done here, I'm going to go over to the driver's side front and repeat the process, and we'll make our way back to that master cylinder. Go ahead and pump the brake, please. Go ahead and pump. We'll go ahead and close up this bleeder screw, make sure it's nice and tight, clean up our mess. You can release the brake pedal, thank you. Now I'm going to go over to the driver's side, repeat this process. Let's get this up to that maximum line. Reinstall your brake fluid cap.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.